Peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
Viewers, good morning. This morning I want to address the issue of Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. The legacy of His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya keeps on moving, keeps on going forward and forward. Since the handshake in 2018 that brought about the peace, the tranquility, the unity of purpose, President Uhuru's star has been rising. All over Africa, people are thinking of using the model that Kenya used to stop any form of violence, chaos on the streets after elections. As you know, all of you are aware that elections in Africa produce two things: after or before or after the voting. Disputed elections, winner takes it all, loser doesn't accept the results. But the Kenyan model takes us miles and miles away from the normal type of democracy. The democracy, a negotiated format, a consensus format. A democracy that gives consensus a chance. A democracy that talks about the future of a country, the unity of a country, as opposed to a fragmented country, polarized country, where most African countries find themselves in. We have seen in the last 10 years or so, most of the elections in Africa have been contested by the opposition. Very few people in Africa, countries in Africa, where opposition has conceded defeat and come up to congratulate the winner. We have seen the South African model has worked very well. The Ghanaian model has worked so well. I don't see any other country in Africa where the models have worked well. I thought it would be Sierra Leone, but today we see Sierra Leone going back to the same ethnic tensions, as you can see from the reports that are circulating in the international media and the local media. So elections in Africa are contentious issues. They create a contentious position, create a departing point for the people of Africa, of that particular nation. The legacy of Uhuru Kenyatta, therefore, will be remembered for having brought the tranquility that we have today, the peace, the new format, the new tool of having a better organized civil Africa, an Africa without violence, an Africa without chaos after elections, when the opposition accepts to work for the interests of a nation, not personal interests. This has worked in Kenya, and thank you very much, Your Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, for the tenacity and the steadfastness that you have guided this handshake up to today. For those who want to mutilate the handshake belittle the handshake. One lesson they should learn is to look at Libya. Libya was once a territory we all respected. It is no more. Let's keep the handshake and the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Thank you. Way back in 1998, the late Secretary General of the United Nations by name Kofi Annan thought of an idea, brought an idea of saying the only way to bring world order where crimes committed that are not punishable in local courts, local countries, regional courts could be taken to an international crimes court. The Rome Statute and Rome Treaty of 1998 July was an offspring of already cooked DSGE intelligence system mechanism to keep Africa under check. Up to date, the French government pays 70% of the salaries of the International Criminal Court, from the porter to the judge, to the prosecutor, and the rest of the other people. This was a project of Kofi Annan and the Kofi Annan Foundation, followed by George Soros as an accomplice of Kofi Annan, brought in by Luis Moreno Campo and the entire system of the West, some countries in the West, to keep check on African countries that did not agree with the policies of the French and to their policies of Western culture. The International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Luis Moreno Campo agreed in all this that yes, he has been picking money, extra monies, and we followed the story together with my group in France, powerful investigators in France who worked together with me. And we found out that, truly speaking, Luis Moreno Campo, Fernandez Gumedi, the former judge, the president of the International Criminal Court, laundered money, some coming from American banks themselves. This evidence was put in the ICC. In the case of Bashir versus the chief prosecutor, I filed an application which I still have and which I'm going to publicize again so that people can know that I was right. I've been vindicated because the American friends now have found that my credibility is real, that I was right when I stood up to say this court is corrupt. This court launders money, $17 million of United States money, laundered through Bahamas, through New York banks, back to Ocampo's personal assistant by then, called Fernandez Gumedi Silvia. who later on rose to the ranks of becoming the president of International Criminal Court. It has taken us time, energy, effort, resources to investigate the corruption scandal that have rocked the International Criminal Court. Why should African countries continue to be in the ICC? Yet even the superpowers like America are saying no, we have enough courts to try our own people. Viewers, it has taken Americans over 20 years to listen to our voices when we told Rainberger in Nairobi that this court is a corrupt court.
Today, on the eve of September the 11th, I want to deliver a clear and unambiguous message on behalf of the President of the United States. The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us.
A case of the Kenyan people. These cases in Kenya, the chief prosecutor called Fatou Bensouda put serious statements at the end of the cases, discharge and termination. In legal language, these cases pose a very serious threat in the future. What the people of Kenya can do, and they should do, is today to wrap up the work envelope. Because until this envelope is sealed, thrown in Indian Ocean, the chief prosecutor in the future will come and look for that envelope, use it to incriminate people again. It brings me back to the situation. America is sealing its journey out of the ICC. Why do you wait? Why don't you take this opportunity to seal your journeys out of the ICC? America is quitting, warning that it cannot no longer be a party to such an obnoxious court, a court that has no powers, that talks from this side and vomits from the other side, a court that cuts and pastes evidence, a court that buys witnesses, a court that incites incentives, gives incentives to witnesses of a passport and a relocation, then you tell lies about people. A court that sentences you as per the words there. Why should you leave a country that has a jury that checks on what the judges would do, the excesses of judges, and go to a country, a court that has no jury? Time has come for Africa to think. Do we need this court? Does Africa need this court?
A very good morning to you. It is the 3rd of December 2019. The show is Good Morning Africa. The television station is Punchline Africa TV, all the way from Kenya's capital here in Nairobi. A very wet morning, but I see some sunshine has started coming out in the skies. But it's wet but warm. So the wonders of climate change. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and I'll be taking you through the show today. Dr. Matanga will be joining me towards the end of the show, and so we'll be looking at the topic of the day when he comes, and I think we'll look at the legacy of Uhuru Kenyatta and the latest things that is happening in Kenya, the BBI. Of course, we will continue to have discussions around this report that was launched last week on Wednesday by President Uhuru Kenyatta together with opposition leader Raila Odinga and Vice President Dr. William Ruto, among other dignitaries that were part of that very colorful event that happened last week. That has become a subject now of debate, and politicians have taken a go at it and are just up and down the country trying to politicize this document. And Kenyans are now wondering, was it meant for politics, or is it something that was meant to bring cohesion and peace and unity and solve some of our problems here in Kenya? Because as it appears, the politicians have hijacked the whole process, and it looks like this is another political thing that the country has to deal with. But that is something that we'll discuss later. Thank you so much. And I can see a lot of you are writing to us this morning. Could you be blessing you, saying you're making us know of something that happened and in Biafra land, and I think I have some news from there, from a statement that the leader of IPOB, Nnamdi Kanu, made yesterday in regards to, I think, the house of his lawyer and other Biafrans might have been killed yesterday. Is it yesterday or when? Yes, and so he made a statement, and so we'll be looking at that among other news across Africa. But right now, I would like us to just go through what is making headlines in Kenya this morning, and just the headlines in the leading Kenyan newspapers. The three of them are the Standard newspaper, the Daily Nation, and also the Star newspaper. So we will start with the Standard, where Old Giant Scoop top KCP stars, and this is in regards to the end of the final exams for primary school, so that the students are able to go to high school, and so the selections for the top schools are done, and so apparently there are a lot of students or pupils who will be missing out on the schools, on the preferred schools, the schools of choice, as the way the selection was done this time round appears a lot of pupils will not be able to get the schools that they might have wanted to attend. So I think that is what the Standard is really focusing on today, mentioning Form 1 admission schools like Pangani, Alliance, Kapsabet Boys, Miranda, Mang, Moi Girls, Kenya High, Lead Park, and Magoha says most pupils missed their preferred schools for not following selection rules. Parents, next time, please help you as pupils choose in the right manner, so that they don't get to suffer the same fate some of these pupils now are suffering, and they've ended up missing out on the schools that they might have wished to attend. So if you want to get the details of that, Standard newspaper has really focused on that this morning, so you can get yourself a copy, or better yet, go to page 3 of the Standard newspaper and get to know what's really happening. It's just, that is all Standard has today on the front pages. And then, of course, inside we see a lot of other issues on another teachers' strike, and not issues 22 days notice. So are we braving ourselves to another teacher strike, especially as we are approaching a new term come January? Right now, students are in a very long holiday that started end of October. The schools will resume, the primary and high school will resume in January, and we see the teachers union there. It is being insinuated that they might be planning another strike. I don't know why they normally do this at the beginning of the year, or towards the national examination period. That is when NAT normally choose and see its fit to go on a strike. I don't understand why. Perhaps it's the most crucial times in the calendar, in the education calendar in this country. So perhaps strikes are best effective during that time. So students or pupils in public schools get to suffer really when things like this happen. And that explains why, even when you see the results that came out during the KCP, a lot of students who did well, very few of them came from public schools. A lot of the students came from private schools. And I think that is something that should worry us, because just a small section of Kenyan pupils or students are able to afford to be taken to private schools, but majority go to public schools. But the performance and the quality of public schools and education standards have really deteriorated over the years. I think after the introduction of the free primary education, which I really don't think is free anymore. Well, it's much affordable, but there are few monies here and there that the schools ask, I think, to help the ease in running the schools, because sometimes the money from the government is late and things like that. So the free education has been marred with a lot of challenges, and the schools have to deal with. And so that has led to, one, the classes has been crowded so much. There's been a shortage of teaching staff, especially in some schools which are very much in the interiors of Kenya. Others lack the proper infrastructure. So it's been, I don't know, this is something that the Ministry of Education, together with other county governments and the different county ministries there, should work together in the ministry, in the education sector, so that they see that the standards are uplifted or upgraded in the public sector, in the public schools, because the kids get to suffer, the students get to suffer there. And as I said earlier, the students who made it, the top students, majority of them, maybe even 95% of the students who did well in this year's, who topped in this year's KCPE, came from private schools. And that is something that should worry any government, seeing how much money is pumped in this. And education is a very important sector in a country. So this is something that stakeholders should go out there, instead of just calling on strikes. Like you see now, NAT is gearing towards another strike, and these other teaching bodies, they're always wrangling and power struggles and things like that. And they forget what is the purpose of why they're even there. We see over the years that the standards of the public schools here in Kenya continues to, deteriorate, and a lot of students there, they don't get to do well because of the challenges that are marred, that mar these schools. And I don't know why this has not become. I don't know why the Ministry of Education did not even. I hope they're seeking to look into why, the public schools are not doing well, have not been doing well. I did not hear Magoha say anything about the CS for Education, mention anything to do with why public schools are not doing very well. So while we celebrate these students that are going to, are from private schools and are going to, they are able to go now to the best high schools here in Kenya. But why, we should ask ourselves, why is it that the children from the public sector, who are the majority in this country, are not able to afford themselves ways in topping in when it comes to national exams like it used to be during our days and olden days? Primary schools and public schools used to do so well. So something went wrong somewhere, and somebody needs to find out why the education sector and in the public sector really is not doing very well. So thank you so much. So if you want to know the details there, you can go to the Standard newspaper online or page 3 and other subsequent pages there, and you can get yourself more information there. So thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, very worrying report that I was reading earlier today that happened in Biafra land in regards to the lawyer of Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, and that is a conversation we'll be having towards the end of the show before Dr. Matsanga comes in. And so let's now look at the Star newspaper there, and it says that Ruto troops retreat to Kajiado to plan for BBI. The group opposes a referendum, wants proposals to go through Parliament. Now, MPs from Kalenjin and Maasai areas will take a position on BBI report and 2022. So what is that? I think if you want to get the details of that, the planned meeting by DP Ruto's allies, you can go to page 4 and 5. Remember, they have insisted that the BBI report should go through Parliament. And we've seen even the Parliament Speaker, the Speaker of National Assembly, Mr. Justin Muturi, the other day, he's been very vocal, saying, you know what, this process was not initiated by members of Parliament. It did not come from Parliament. It was initiated from outside. So for it even to come to Parliament, then it should be formulated into a bill, because that is how Parliament operates. And so he was saying this is something that did not come from Parliament, and so Parliament, it should not be brought to Parliament to pass it. And so he was supporting essentially that the BBI should go through referendum for some of those proposals to be actualized. But we are also looking at it. I think we've been looking at it now over time, and just in the Kenyan law, there are certain things that if they touch the constitution, according to our constitution, then that will warrant a referendum. And the change in Parliament, including a prime minister, that is one of the proposals in the BBI, then that automatically should warrant a referendum. I don't know how these members of a referendum. So I'm not understanding how these members of these politicians are really reading this or even understand our constitution, because our constitution is very clear. And so if there's some sections of it, if it has to be changed or tampered with, then that will have to require, the say from the people. Kenyan citizens have to go out there and vote for or not, if they want that change made or not. So and so here we see, even on the front pages, the National Assembly Speaker Justin Muturi told a press conference yesterday that BBI should be converted into a bill for members to discuss in Parliament. So that story is in page 4 and 5 of the Star newspaper. And still on the front pages, there are thousands of KCP students to miss a national slot despite high marks. I'm telling you, it's very difficult here. In Kenya, if you're non-Kenyan, you might not understand the magnitude of this, but there are high schools that are very prestigious. And what is very interesting now, we struggle taking through the pupils through primary school, private, because our public schools are not doing very well. Very few of them are actually performing very well. So after that, now we struggle for them to get into public good high schools. So the disconnect in that is just what I don't understand. So the same way we still have very prestigious public, high schools that every parent dreams for their kids to go and attend and go to school there. The same way I think also now the government should come and improve the levels and the quality in the primary sector, so that there's not that move and struggle so much for parents, especially those who cannot afford to give their children the private education. So that is also a story that is making headlines there on the Star newspaper this morning. And Speaker Muturi, why BBI report cannot be debated in Parliament. And that story is on page 7 of the Star newspaper. And Star journalist Olo Madaki, suspect Kerubo held for 14 days. That is on page 9. And expect a very wet Christmas, warns the weatherman. That is on page 10. The rains have been pounding this country, all sides, all corners of Kenya, and indeed across East Africa. And we've seen, and also across Africa, havoc that is being caused by the heavy rains. What is really interesting is that the weathermen, especially in Kenya, they had told us this is going to be very short rains, and so nothing to worry about. And now I think it's not short rains anymore. It's coming in and it has caused havoc. We've seen a couple of days ago, it killed so many, floods killed so many people in West Pokot, which is very sad. And our condolences goes to the families that have lost their loved ones through these acts of nature. We cannot do anything about it. But also this also speaks to our preparedness to deal with natural calamities like fires, like flooding, like famine, starvation, and things like that. So perhaps this is a challenge that the government of Kenya should take very seriously and see how then can they prepare well when things like this happen, so that we don't get to lose so many lives. Of course, some of these things were inevitable. Nobody really thought, a mudslide will happen in Pokot and kill this number of people. And then owing to the terrain of that place and where it is, I think it became very difficult. So maybe not much could have been done, but perhaps there are measures that could be put in place so that next time we don't get to lose such a huge number. I think over 50 people lost their lives there from West Pokot, and it is a very saddening situation. So I've looked at the Standard and the Daily Nation. Just in a short while, I'll be coming with an African news. And then later on, Dr. Matanga will be joining me towards the end of the show. And then we can have the African conversations. But right now, let me look at the last newspaper here. Only look at the front pages. We don't go into the details. You can go online if you're not in Kenya. If you're in Kenya, you go get yourself a copy or still go online and get to read the stories in details there. And on the Daily Nation front pages, pain as top students miss dream schools. I've talked about this. I'll not even go through it. And the celebration after scoring high marks in the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education examination 2 weeks ago was replaced with tears and heartbreak upon learning that they had not been selected to join their schools of choice. That is the high schools of choice. And that is on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. Why Muturi is wary of Parliament. MPs will mutilate the Building Bridges Initiative report if it lands in the National Assembly before being fine-tuned by experts, warn Speaker. And this is something I think we said here yesterday, and we've been saying it because should this BBI report be taken to Parliament, we will completely lose focus, and whatever will be passed will completely be the opposite, or perhaps what Kenyans really wanted, or those who gave their opinion whatever they wanted. So that is the Speaker of Parliament who is telling us to be wary that this report should not be brought to Parliament. The Speaker of the Kenyan Parliament telling us that these members here that I preside over, they are not the best people to look into this report. So, I mean, as a Kenyan, I'm worried, and I've been very wary when I hear, politicians insisting that this thing should be taken to Parliament because it will be turned into a political something there that we will lose focus, and perhaps things that we wanted to be made, changes that we would have wanted as Kenyans, perhaps will not be done there. So thank you so much, Beneth, Onyeka, and the rest of you. Keep writing, and while you do that, it is always a pleasure to know where you're watching us from across the world. And a vicious fight for Alcoblo bribe cash, and everyone wanted a share of the money extorted from drunk drivers, forcing the government to withdraw the gadgets. Is it why the Alcoblo was withdrawn from the Kenyan roads? It had become something that was terrorizing drivers at night because the police and law enforcers used it as a means to extort money from. It's a shame. So it was removed from the roads the other day. And Kenyans are like, what? Especially during these festive seasons. This is when we need the alcohol to be on our roads. But apparently they were using it to collect bribes. And you wonder why, with all these police manning the roads with alcohol and all that, we still have a lot of accidents happening and things that should not be happening in our roads. So that is the reason why the government was forced to withdraw the gadget from our roads. Kenya, we are a very, very special people, aren't we? Oh my goodness, that is a shame. So teachers speak with one voice. Primary school head teachers raised their hands in support of NAT. Secretary General Wilson Sossion during the annual conference at the KRA Training Institute grounds in Mombasa there. So reprieve, that is one story, and another one, reprieve for Manduku as he gets bond. This is the Kenya Ports Authority Managing Director, Daniel Manduku, and he has been granted free bond pending a ruling in his application seeking temporary orders to stop his arrest. arrest and persecution based on police investigations and recommendations. Justice Eric Ogola issued the order yesterday after hearing submissions by Dr. Manduku and the Director of Public Prosecutions. So there it is. So if you really want to get to know what is inside those papers, you will have to go online, or you will get yourself a paper, or get yourself a copy of one of those, or all those newspapers here in Kenya. Thank you so much, and a very good morning to you, wherever you're watching us across the world. Benneth Onyeka, you're saying, my name is Onyeka. You are from Enugu, a state capital of Biafra, but you live in Europe, and you're a full member of the IPOB, and you'll see what the Zoo Army and the police are doing right now in Biafra land. You're saying they put the leader Nnamdi Kanu's lawyer in his house and they fired. Yeah, I have that story. I have it, I think, as one of our news items there. And I think Akujobi Blessing also told us about it. Nganga George, and nice to see you this morning. And good morning, or I think, is it good evening or afternoon? I don't know where you're watching from the US. Thank you so much. So let's just get into the African business and look at the news making headlines across Africa, and we shall start. Oh, and Gaff Jr. saying Scandinavian finest to collect. All right, good. You must be from Kenya. Asante. Thank you so much for watching and for tuning. Good morning to you. And we start with Sudan, where Sudan academics, activists, politicians, and community leaders have signed an open letter to the United States President Donald Trump calling for Sudan to be removed from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. The lengthy letter asks for Sudan to be taken off the list, citing that the ills of the dispossessed regime should not affect the ongoing revolution. Sudan was added to the list in 1993 over charges that then President Omar al-Bashir's government was supporting terrorism, but he has since been overthrown. We go to Tanzania, where now the international rights organization Amnesty International has said a decision by Tanzania to withdraw an article which allows its citizens and NGOs to sue it at the African Court on Human and People's Rights risk deepening repression. In a statement, Amnesty said the withdrawal denies individuals and organizations access to justice. Tanzania, which hosts the court in the northern city of Arusha, will become the second country after Rwanda to withdraw the article. Now, the move is likely to raise concerns over the country whose human rights record has been under scrutiny in the last few years. Now, that is very interesting. And to make it more interesting is that this court is in Tanzania, and now Tanzania has removed itself from being held culpable from the same court that the country. It's confusing, but we will talk about it in a short bit. And we go to Libya, where at least 5 people have died and more were wounded in an overnight airstrike in the suburb of Libya's capital, Tripoli. The Libyan government said Emirati drones had carried out the violent raids on the residential area of El Swani. Now, it also added that there was no military infrastructure there. A government spokesperson said an armed Emirati aircraft had also launched 2 raids on a bridge west of Tripoli. And we go to South Africa, where South African police have arrested 3 members of the National Christian Resistance Movement for an alleged terror plot. The leader of the so-called Crusaders group, Harry Korsen, and 2 others were found with firearms, ammunition, and explosives after a tip-off that they were about to launch a string of attacks on government buildings, shopping centers, and informal settlements where most black people live. This is according to police. This is a group of white South Africans, all right? Now, the trio have made a brief appearance in court, and they were not asked to plead and were remanded in custody until their next court appearance on January 21st. Police said they were still investigating. All right, now you see terror now is taking another phase, different facets of terror groups now. All right, so we go to Tanzania. And Tanzania mothers who were thrown out of school for getting pregnant have graduated the last weekend thanks to a retired teacher. A teenage pregnancy in Tanzania became a topic of international debate after President John Magufuli said in 2017 that pregnant girls should be expelled from school. But now 72-year-old retired teacher Martina Simon Sierra is giving them a second chance with her school for mothers in Arusha, northern Tanzania. The Faraja Center provides courses such as catering and tailoring, but crucially it has baby cares, which allows students to concentrate on classes uninterrupted. And we go back to Libya again, where France government has decided against sending 6 boats to Libya's navy amid aid groups concerned that the vessels will be used to make migrants to detention centers known for widespread abuses. Now, 8 advocacy organizations sued the government earlier this year, saying the donation of inflatable boats would violate a European embargo on Libya and make France complicit in abuse. A French defense ministry official, without elaborating, referred Monday to the situation in Libya in explaining the decision to not go through with the delivery. The official was not authorized to be named in discussing the decision. And we go to Mali, where Mali has set December 14th as the official start date for the country's inclusive national dialogue. It comes after several months of consultations with opinion leaders, stakeholder and local groups from all sides of the country. The dialogue, according to President Ibrahim Keita, is supposed to put Malians around the talking table in the order to establish a new roadmap for the country. And we go to South Sudan, where an international aid group says armed men stormed its compound in South Sudan and assaulted several staff as Relief International calls the Sunday morning attack in Maban town a senseless act of violence. Staffers have since been relocated. Now, South Sudan is one of the world's most dangerous places for humanitarian work. It is not immediately clear who carried out the Sunday's attack in the countries emerging from a civil war, but South Sudan Army spokesperson Lul Ruai Koang said he was unaware of the attack. Alrighty then. And we go to Biafra. And the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, has said that the police and army on Monday invaded the house of his lawyer in Anambra State. Kanu added that the 3 IPOB members were also killed in the alleged onslaught. He called on world bodies to intervene in the intimidation of IPOB members in Nigeria. And this is what he wrote, and I'll just quote what Mr. Nnamdi Kanu in a statement, what he said. And he wrote, confirmed reports indicate that a combined team of Nigerian police and military assassination squad invaded the house of my lawyer, Oraifite, in Anambra State this morning, that is on Monday, in a bid to kill him and his family. This comes on the heel of yet another killing of 2 IPOB family members who are peacefully gathering in Arondizwogo on Sunday, December 1st, and their bodies are still in the morgue. Now, police and army must know that this is still a statement by Nnamdi Kanu, and it says police and army must know that the time is fast approaching when British diplomatic clout and protection may not be enough to shield them from the consequences of their daily crimes against innocent Biafrans. End of quote by IPOB leader there, Nnamdi Kanu, over the attacks that happened yesterday. And we move to the DRC Congo, where gunfire rang out in the DRC Congo town of Beni on Monday as protesters demanding the United Nations withdrawal from the city again marched towards the United Nations headquarters. Security forces blocked hundreds of demonstrators attempting to get close to the UN compound house inside the airport near Beni, one of the United Nations bases in the area. And the latest on the Nile dispute is that the irrigation ministers of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan have met in Cairo for a new round of talks aimed at resolving a dispute over a multi-billion-dollar dam being built by the Ethiopian government. The 2-day meeting, which got underway on Monday in the Egyptian capital, comes almost a month after 3 sides agreed to work towards resolving the issue at a U.S. brokered meeting in Washington, D.C. Addis Ababa contends that the project, dubbed the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is crucial to its economic development and at its peak will generate more than 6,000 megawatts of electricity. But Cairo is concerned. The dam, located near Ethiopia's border with Sudan and approximately 70% complete, will restrict its already scarce share of water from the Nile. And we end with Namibia, where 6 Namibian officials and businessmen suspected of involvement in bribery and money laundering scheme will remain in custody until February 20th, a court in the capital Windhoek has said. The decision on Monday came after their lawyers said they would abandon their bail application following their arrest last week, according to the local media. The 6 include former Minister of Fisheries and Marine Resources Bernard Esau and former Minister of Justice Saki Shangala, and who were accused of corruption, fraud, and tax evasion. The other suspects are Esau's son-in-law, Thompson Hatuikulipi, his cousin James Hatuikulipi, and businessman Ricardo Gustavo and Piers Mwatelulo. It's very interesting how when we decide to steal, we just all of our family members get involved here in Africa. We've seen this is not an isolated case in Namibia, where one minister is accused, but also his son-in-law and his cousin also benefited from this public's loot. I mean, it's ridiculous. So that is the latest from Africa this morning. A very good morning to you, wherever you're watching us. Thank you so much for engaging with us, and thank you so much for your company. Let me just read a few of your messages here this morning. I think that... I read from So Anthony Mugatha, you're saying the media should air this issue. We don't want a repeat of what happened in Biafra. Yes, indeed. And I think Miriam Lele, hi to you. Thank you, namesake. I see you there. Thank you for joining and thank you for writing to us. So very worrying reports there coming from Biafra about an attack that happened yesterday on Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of IPOB. His lawyer was attacked and thereby allegedly by the police and the army. This is according to a statement that he put out yesterday. And he said in that incident, about 3 people died, I think. And that follows another death that happened where 2 people died some few days back. And so his worried about the lives and security of Biafrans there in Nigeria. So we will talk about that. Let's start with our first story of the day. That was in Sudan. And now Sudanese academics, activists, politicians, and community leaders have signed an open letter to the United States President Donald Trump, calling for Sudan to be removed from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. This is not something that has, a lot of even countries have come in, even South Africa has come in, even Egypt, I think, have joined the conversation, and they've been asking the United States now to remove Sudan from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism in the world. And Sudan was added to this list in 1993 when Osama bin Laden was discovered to have been given refuge there in Sudan. If you could just go back and look at the history of Sudan and under the leadership of former President Omar al-Bashir. All right. So this is what got Sudan into trouble, and of course the how Omar al-Bashir was, and how his his government was quite not what the Western world would really call in terms of human rights abuse, human rights standards or governance or democracy. It fell short of a lot of these things, and so Sudan since 1993 has been on the list of the countries that sponsor terrorism across the world. So the impact of that is when you want to go invest, an investor is coming from America or in Europe, from Europe or in other parts of the world, and you have your money and you want to go there and you're looking for a country to invest, there are things they look at, and you don't want to come across a country that says, you know what, the list of the countries that sponsor terrorism in the world. So this has really helped in bringing the economy of Sudan to the low, because nobody would want to come and invest in a country that sponsors terrorism. Like, no. So Sudan has been suffering from this, but of course, when Omar al-Bashir was still in power, he did not care, because he still received a lot of aid from other players that the government was very close with, especially from the Arab world. But now it's a new day in Sudan, and the new Prime Minister, Mr. Hamdok, is just trying to open up Sudan to the rest of the world. But the first thing they need to do is to have Sudan removed from this list of terrorism. But the US has been very adamant about this, and I think we've had this conversation here because, the former President Omar al-Bashir has a warrant of arrest over his head by the ICC, and they've been wanting and calling for him to be taken to the ICC and to be tried there over, what happened in Darfur, and the deaths that happened, and other human rights abuses that happened under his watch as the president of Sudan. So I think that this has been the carrot that they've been dangling over Sudan, and saying, if you want us to get the country out of the list of the countries that sponsor terrorism, then you have to do us one favor. You must get your former president to be tried in the ICC, or to, or any, but to the ICC, because that is where he faces, he has a warrant of arrest from. And so the US, the answer that it has been giving when Sudan has been calling for it to be removed on that list, it has not been very concrete. They've not been giving proper reasons as to why. They're saying they're still surveying the situation. They're still looking at the new administration. Sudan has done all it can. In fact, just a few, was it on Friday? On Thursday last week? They even, the party that Omar al-Bashir ruled with for the last 30 years was disbanded, and its structures was disbanded. I don't know if the government has taken a siege of all its properties. So is that not enough to please the US government? Because that is just one of the things that the protesting side was demanding from. But you can imagine where perhaps those calls was coming from. But the protesters had been demanding, that the party be disbanded, which something I found to be a little bit weird, because, why? What effect will that have, in Sudan, disbanding the party of former President Omar al-Bashir? But perhaps, I don't know, they know better. But the party was disbanded, and all its, everything that it had has been, seized with the government. And so now Sudan is saying, we are ready. We are a new country. It's a new day here. We have a new administration. We are trying to work on a new constitution and a new structure. And so now we're trying to put everything proper in place that had lacked during the leadership of Omar al-Bashir. So now what we need then is for the United States to remove the country from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism across the world. So now academics, activists, politicians, and community leaders signed together in one voice this open letter to the US President Donald Trump to consider removing Sudan from this list. This is a story that I'll be following for you, and I'd like to really know how, Mr. Donald Trump there, who has his own problems. I think the impeachment, started, and now it has gone to a Senate there. So he has his own headache to deal with. But being the world leader and being the country that puts Sudan on this list anyway, this is something that he has to look at. And so we'll be following this story for you and see how the US this time round will respond to this letter from these people right now, because even the Prime Minister of Sudan, Mr. Hamdok, has made that call several times, but the US have been very reluctant, and whatever reasons they've been giving have not been very, very concrete, something that you can take to the bank. And so let's see if this letter will make any changes and will, compel the US to remove Sudan from the list of the countries that sponsor terrorism across the world. That is a very bad title for a country. Across the world, you sponsor terrorism. That is not That is not a very good title for a country to have. So there you go. And then we go to Tanzania. Now, I don't know what is happening in Tanzania, the things that are happening in this country, especially under the leadership of President Pombe Magufuli. A lot has been happening, and now the international rights organization Amnesty International has said a decision by Tanzania to withdraw an article which allows its citizens and NGO to sue it at the African Court on Human and People's Rights risk deepening repression. So Tanzania removed that clause that allows a citizen or an NGO to take it to go sue it in that court. So it removed this article from so it cannot be held responsible. So if you're in Tanzania and you feel that the government, you cannot get justice in the Tanzanian courts, and you decide to go to the African Court of Human Rights and People's Rights, you cannot take Tanzania there. And what is interesting about this is this court, this very court that Tanzania that does not want to be party to or to be held accountable in, this court is in Arusha, is in Tanzania. So Tanzania is hosting a court for Africa that is meant to settle disputes in Africa. If I cannot find justice in Kenya, or I feel like the government is doing something that is not wrong, that is not right, and I cannot find justice in the Kenyan courts, so I can sue the government in that court, in the African Court on Human and People's Rights. All right, in Tanzania, but Tanzania, a country that hosts this court, has removed itself from being held accountable to this court that is there, the African court. I see that's why it has even been difficult to form this African court. I know we want to get rid of ICC, and African countries want to get out of ICC and all of that stuff. But if we can't even want to be party of our own courts here in Africa, if we don't have the confidence in our own institutions here, or in our own justice institutions here in Africa, and in our own judicial processes, what are we saying to the rest of the world? Are we safe as the citizen of Africa? Are we safe? What is this move by Tanzania telling the rest of the world? This court that is in my country, I don't want to be party to it. I will not be subscribing to it. Should I do anything, I cannot be held accountable in that court. What are we saying? Do we not have a confidence in our own institutions? Do we not have confidence in our own ways of doing things? Because this is a court that was formed to operate in Africa and to look at human and people rights here in Africa, which I think a lot of governments here in Africa do not have the best records when it comes to human rights, governance, very poor. Democracy, that is not even a word that is appreciated in a lot of our African countries. So Anthony Mugatha there, you're saying there is a rise of dictatorship in Tanzania. I think there's something that is happening in Tanzania that we should look at. And among other, I think, news that I was having here in the morning, not just a while ago, about Tanzania again, mothers who were thrown out of school. Remember this proclamation that President Pombe Magufuli made in 2017, that any teenage girl who is pregnant should be removed from school, should not be allowed to continue with the education. And that is something that has costed the country a lot of problems, and a lot of even donors have not been agreeing with Tanzania in this regard, and have pulled out their support and their funds from Tanzania because it's not right. And even myself, I don't think is the right thing. You cannot punish bad with bad, because if a teenager gets pregnant and then you decide, fine, now you're pregnant, so that is how your life, that is the end of your life with education. Two wrongs cannot make a right. The teenager already made a mistake, and the government is already making a mistake in taking this kid out of school. A 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, they're supposed to be in school, so you cannot, You cannot have them out of school. Instead, the conversation we should be having is, why are we having a rise of teenage pregnancy that has become very prevalent, not just in Tanzania, but also here in Kenya? We remember last year, even this year, even during the sitting of the KCPE examination, primary school, a few cases of teenage pregnancies were present. A few students did the examinations. I think it was there one of them in hospital had just delivered, and a few of them were pregnant. But you cannot deny these kids an opportunity to go back and better themselves, because if they have made a mistake, and now you're also making a mistake as a government for barring them to continue with something that might give them, a better future, in their coming life, and you're refusing to allow them to go back to school. I think that is something that President Pombe Magufuli should really reconsider, because we have such cases, like I said, here in Kenya. And last year, it forced the Ministry of Education to do an investigation, an internal investigation, and look into as to why is there a rise of teenage pregnancy here in Kenya? Why are we having so many girls dropping out of school? Why are we having so many, men being taken to jail because they've had relationships with underage children? It has become something that it is worrying. So I'd rather the government find ways, and especially you'll find that a lot of these people they're teachers. Majority of the cases you've seen here in Kenya, some cases the teachers were involved, their own teachers. So you take action on these teachers, on these adults. All right? Because when you refuse for a 13-year-old to continue with their education, what are we doing? What future do we have for this student, for the generations that will come after her? So we have to look at that. And two wrongs cannot make a right. So on this one, even myself, I was not in agreement with President John Magufuli. So I can hope that he can reconsider, among other controversial decisions that his government made. That I will not even get into, but this is the one thing that I really had a problem with. So it's a good thing that there is a retired teacher there in Tanzania who took in these girls, and they were able to graduate, and at least they're having a new lease of life. I mean, President Magufuli, please reconsider. We need these girls back to school by any means possible, because that is the only way that they can have a better future. Stopping school at the age of 13, 14, 15, the future there is already blink. So we cannot make a bad situation worse. So we have to find solutions that are lasting. We have to find solutions that at the end of the day will actually solve the problem, or make the situation a bit better. But denying them a chance to better their lives, that is uncalled for. And so I think that I'm happy that there are some players who are coming in and trying to help in this situation, but also I think the government of Pombe Magufuli should reconsider this decision. So there it is. Tanzania has withdrawn from, African Court on Human and People's Rights. It has withdrawn an article that allows the citizens of Tanzania and the NGOs there to go and sue the government. And the elections are coming up in Tanzania next year, and so I don't want to look too much into it. I remember yesterday here we were talking about the opposition leader is back in the country, who was shot, I think 2 years ago, almost lost his life. He was rushed here in Nairobi for some treatment, and then airlifted abroad, and now he was back in Tanzania, and he's saying should Chadema, which is the opposition party there, give him the opportunity to be the flag bearer, he will be happy to run against against President Magufuli, and he will be happy to run for the presidency in Tanzania. And opposition organizations, they have been a target by the government. Now we hear people disappearing, being kidnapped by the roadside, and those are stories that you could not hear coming from Tanzania. So Anthony Mugatha, I know you're there worrying the same way I'm worrying here. What is really happening there in Tanzania, and and we know that Tanzania is one of the countries that is celebrated here in Africa over its political stability and, the nature of Tanzanians. They're very welcoming, they're very warm, and things like that. But what is happening when it comes to democracy? What is really happening there in Tanzania? So something else that really caught my attention this morning, South African police have arrested 3 members of the National Christian Resistance Movement for an alleged terror plot. Now listen. National Christian Resistance Movement, it was led by 3 white South Africans there, and they're planning to go bomb government institutions that and informal settlements that are mostly inhabited by black people. What has the world come to now? There's a very worrying, news there from South Africa. So I'm hoping that now from xenophobia, black South Africans fighting against their own black Africans from other countries, and now it is a National Christian Resistance Movement, a white, I don't want to call it a white supremacy, but white South Africans, they're planning to go and attack government buildings, shopping centers, informal settlements, mostly inhabited by black people. This sounds like terrorism, and it's, if you're going to attack government, that is what Al-Shabaab does here in Kenya. Well, they've not attacked government institutions, but we've seen them bombing police stations, attacking shopping centers, going to places where they know they'll get so many people and they'll get a lot of casualties there. This sounds like from the playbook of a terrorist group. So South African government should look into that matter very, very keenly and see what's happening there. These people calling themselves the National Christian Resistance Movement. What are they resisting? That is ridiculous. And these religious ideological wars are very dangerous, That is why, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, what do you call them? The Hamas of the world, Mujahideen, they thrive because when it comes to religious ideological belief, somebody becomes completely brainwashed and indoctrinated. That is very difficult for you to convince them otherwise. So this is a very dangerous group. And most of the times they don't even care about losing their own lives. All right. Gremta Susu, you're saying, my darling sister, good morning. God bless you. And Dr. Matsanga for good work you're doing for Africa. Thank you so much. And thank you for the kind words. Gremta Susu, where are you watching us from this morning? It is afternoon here. It's just a few minutes past midday here in Nairobi. I know it's a good morning where you are. Where are you watching us from, and what is the latest? Please share, and I'll be happy to share with the rest of the world. So the matter that we talked about earlier about Biafra, and the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, has said that the police and army on Monday invaded the house of his lawyer in Anambra State. All right. So Kanu added that 3 IPOB members were killed in the onslaught. And he also called on world bodies to intervene in the intimidation of the IPOB members in Nigeria. So this is just a statement. I'll just read part of it that he issued on his social media platforms. And on Twitter, he said, confirmed reports indicate that a combined team of Nigeria police and military assassination squad invaded the home of my lawyer in Oraifite, did I say that name right? In Anambra State on Monday in a bid to kill him and his family. Now, this comes on the heel of yet another killing of 2 IPOB family members who were peacefully gathering in Orindizwogu on Sunday, the 1st of December. Their bodies are still in the morgue. And the statement continues to say, police and army must know that the time is fast approaching when British diplomatic clout and protection may not be enough to shield them from the consequences of their daily crimes against innocent Biafrans. So, end of that quote. This is just an excerpt of that statement that Mr. Nnamdi Kanu issued yesterday over some attack that happened in his lawyer's house there in Anambra State. Remember, Nnamdi Kanu has been saying that he wants to come back to Nigeria to bury his mother that died last month. He's been looking for opportunity, but just the other day I was reading here a statement on Sunday from the police there that said, no, if he comes here, we have a warrant of arrest over his head, so we are going to arrest him, and so let him not dare come here, because if he comes, you're going to arrest him. And so, it has been a very mixed situation for Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, and I can imagine how difficult this must be for him. Because he is said to have been very close to his mother, and now he's not able to come back. Imagine when you're not able to come back and bury your mother or your brother or just a loved one. It must be very devastating for Mr. Nnamdi Kanu. So he cannot make his way back to Nigeria to bury his mom, and he's stuck there. And now the attack on his lawyer. I don't know why they target. Is it a message they were sending to Nnamdi Kanu that, you know what, if you even dare step foot in this country? So was it an intimidation move? What message was the government and the authority there trying to send to Nnamdi Kanu? Because they went to his lawyer's house in Anambra State, and it is said that 3 members of the indigenous people of Biafra there lost their lives. This comes after another death that happened on Sunday that killed 2 people. So in 2 days, because this incident happened yesterday on Monday, so in 2 days, about 5 people have died in nearly the same location. So these are very worrying reports there. And he's saying the military assassination squad invaded the home of the lawyer there yesterday, and they wanted to kill both him and his family. When you read about his story and how he was able to escape from Nigeria, this sounds like the script from the same story. The way I think he was having an afternoon nap, some of his friends came there and told him, you know what, the police are in the compound and they're looking for you, and he had to jump through the back door and the back fence wall, and he escaped by foot to some other country. And it's very it was very dramatic there. So this is another attack or another attempt. This is another assassination, as he calls it. He's saying that the assassination squad invaded the home of his lawyer there yesterday. So if you have any information about this incident, please share with us, and we will continue sharing with the rest of the world. Thank you so much, even as you continue to engage with me this afternoon. As I mentioned there, it is already afternoon here in Kenya, about 8 minutes past midday here in Nairobi. Thank you so much. And we move to the DRC Congo, where this has become another battleground. Yesterday, I think we were having the same conversation that the residents in Beni, a town that has been infested with militants group there, killing day in, day out of locals there. And what was really agitating the locals was that there's a heavy presence of UN, MONUSCO, that is the mission of the United Nations missions there in the DRC. In Beni, they have a camp and a base there in Beni, and also there's a presence of an army there and a local police. But even with all of that, these militants were able to infiltrate, inside of Beni and still carry out these brazen acts of terrorism, killing locals there with these security apparatus in the same location. So this really agitated the residents at Beni, and they took matters into their own hands over the weekend, starting from Friday, and they went and burned the United Nations Mission Center there, and also they chased away the local police and the local army. So it is a very worrying events there in Beni. My worry is that I've not heard President Felix Tshisekedi come out and address this matter outrightly. even immediately after he was sworn in, we started seeing the insurgents, the coming out of these regroupings of these, armed groups. And President Tshisekedi has not, I don't think he has done much in terms of providing leadership to end these militia groups in the DRC Congo. And this is why I've not seen him talk about what is happening now. I've not seen him address it. I've not seen him raising concerns. And the mission in the DRC, the United Nations mission there, they have the mandate to shoot and kill anybody that is seen to violating human rights. So I'm sure they've gathered enough intelligence. For heaven's sakes, it is the United Nations there. They have enough evidence, intelligence that they can actually get hold of these people, together with the DRC army, together with the DRC police. What is happening there in the DRC, especially in Beni there? What is going on? Who is arming these militant groups? Who is responsible? Who is gaining with this chaos that is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Why is President Felix Tshisekedi very quiet, very mum? Why is he not coming out outrightly and condemning these acts of terrorism and condemning the maiming of his own people? Why is he so quiet? Why is the former president quiet, Mr. Joseph Kabila? Even if you are a retired president, you're still a leader in a country. And Mr. Kabila controls 60% of the government in the DRC. Remember, his party won the majority both in Senate, in Parliament, and so he has 60% of the cabinet slots, of the minister slots in Tshisekedi's government. So he has a voice. His voice still matters when it comes to important issues in the DRC Congo, in the DRC. So why is even the former president very quiet? What is it that they know that they're not telling the rest of the world? All of a sudden, an insurgents. Of course, it's not. They have been there for a while now. But what did his government do about it? What advice can he give to his successor, Mr. Tshisekedi? I think there's more to what is happening there in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is a country that it's very saddening. The DRC is one of the richest countries in the world. One of the richest countries in the world. It provides the world with some minerals that can only be found in the DRC, and instead this has become a killing ground, and people die there. Militia groups are taking control there, as if it's there's no government in the DRC. I think I'm very disappointed that when President Felix Tshisekedi was elected, the world was hoping that he would bring in a new style of leadership, but that perhaps the people of the DRC have been waiting for. He'll come in under a new dispensation, and perhaps he'll bring change that the people of DRC so badly needed and wanted. But now we see that since he's coming to power, President Felix Tshisekedi, nothing much seems to change. I don't know if it's because he's not really in full control of the country, so he cannot make certain decisions. And being in full control of the country, I mean that he cannot pass certain bills in Parliament because he does not have the majority. So he has to sort of dance to the tune of his predecessor, Mr. Joseph Kabila, so that they can agree. Remember, they were having even a tussle over when the premiership, the prime minister, because the party with the majority gets to nominate the prime minister, and then if the president agrees with it, and then that's it. So when Joseph Kabila nominated his preferred candidate for the prime minister, Mr. Tshisekedi the first time refused. And so that tells you already there's bad blood there. So Mr. Tshisekedi's hands are tied, basically, because if you need to pass a law in Parliament, then you have to suck up to the Kabila side, for for anything that you want done. So it's a very dicey situation there in DRC. and now this insecurity that has become rampant, and we are seeing a huge number of refugees are fleeing to Uganda and other neighboring African countries. We do not want a repeat of what was happening in Congo years back, and I was very happy that Congo finally was sort of coming to was gaining its stability slowly, but it's disappointing to see. And I don't know what the United Nations missions there in Congo, what they have to say for themselves. Why is it, even with their presence there? And Congo has the biggest contingent of the United Nations Army. Congo is the leading. It has 16,000, if I'm not wrong. It is the leading with the UN Army. The DRC Congo, it's the leading in the world. So with all that men and women with blue helmets in Congo, we're still seeing things like this. I think they should tell us what's happening. I think the United Nations should tell us what their mission there has really achieved, and if at all they've achieved their mandate, and what is it there that they're doing, and why is it still, even with that high number of their soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo, why the insecurity is just on an on-time high, and there's no hope of gaining stability or finding stability or security there in the DRC. And so we move to the Nile dispute that has been happening there. We've seen just a month ago, the United States agreed to broker some mediation between the three warring countries, that is Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Where Sudan, not so much. I think it just has been caught up in the politics and the, of these two countries. Egypt, especially Egypt, is the most disgruntled country here. And so the United States agreed to broker, and United States did not just agree to broker, to mediate this peace between or this dispute between these countries, is because Egypt asked the United States to mediate between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. President Al-Sisi wrote to the government of Donald Trump to help mediate between this dispute in the Nile River. And I think I must have expressed my views here about this dispute here, about how can a chairman of the African Union and the body mandated in solving disputes here in Africa, and the chairperson of that body decides, this body that I am chairing, it is not good enough, it is not equipped enough. Matter of fact, I don't even have faith in it. So what I will do then, I will approach United States and have the country mediate between a problem that my country, as the chairperson of the AU, the dispute my country is having with another African country over a resource that is in Africa, that is the Nile River. I just found that move by Egypt to be ridiculous, to be just the height of ridiculousness, and a vote of no confidence in an institution by Mr. Al-Sisi, in an institution that he is the one who is at the helm of the leadership of this institution, that is the African Union. That he could not trust the structures within the African Union to resolve this dispute between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan has been dragged into it. He had to look out for help from outside of Africa. As an African, as a Pan-African, I think I was very disappointed by the move by Egypt. And I was very disappointed. This is an African resource. This is a dispute involving African countries. Can we not be able to solve our own problems here in Africa without the involvement from outside interference? Do we not have faith in our own institutions? And now we see the move by Tanzania, removing itself from being held capable on a court that is a representative of Africa, an African court that is based in the same country, Tanzania. And Tanzania now has voted to remove an article that there's no citizen in Tanzania or an NGO that can go sue it in that court. What is the government of President Pombe Magufuli planning to do that they don't want to be held culpable? What is it that the government of President Pombe Magufuli, what is it that they want to do? At the end of the day, should they go ahead and do it, nobody should go there and sue them at the African court there in Arusha, in Tanzania. A court within your own country, and you have no respect to it, you have no confidence. Why are you even having this court in your country? And this comes, Rwanda was the first country to ratify that article. Not to ratify, to remove itself from that article. So Rwanda cannot be held accountable. You cannot go sue a citizen in Rwanda, or an NGO or anybody cannot go sue Rwanda in that African court in Arusha, Tanzania. And now Tanzania has followed itself. I am worried by how we lack proper respect of institutions, and that is why we get ourselves in chaos all the time, because we want to just do things the way we want to do things, especially our government, and we do not want to be held accountable. So you want to get away with stuff. At the end of the day, if you have nothing to hide, if your government is just doing its job, you shouldn't be worried about anybody going to sue you anywhere, leave alone that court, not even in your own court. So the fact that Tanzania has made this move, Rwanda did that several years ago, and now Tanzania has followed. And now here we are sitting here talking about the AU chairperson reaching out to the United States and asking the United States to mediate between a problem involving Egypt and other African countries, as if Africa does not have its own mechanisms in how to deal with conflicts and how to resolve conflict and how to find solutions for its own people. I don't know. I'm worn out. Arabetha and Goto there, you're saying good morning, Punchline TV crew. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching. It is an afternoon here in Nairobi, about 22 minutes past midday. Emmanuel Nyakonda, impunity, I suspect. Exactly. What is it that Tanzania is running away from? If you're just doing your work as a government, why should you worry about finding yourself in any court anyways? So the fact that Tanzania has done that, and if you've been looking at the news that has been coming from Tanzania lately, there's been some. It's not been very. It is not the Tanzania that we grew up knowing. Myself. Things have changed, especially with the coming of President John Pombe Magufuli. A lot has changed, and I think democracy is on trial there. I think we've seen opposition parties coming out and saying they are being a target from the government, and unfair targeting towards them by the government, and others are being kidnapped, others, I don't know what is happening. So, and now this. And Tanzania is going to an election next year. So you know what? That is a news, like I said earlier, that I will be keeping an eye and I will be looking at very, very keenly. So anyway, the irrigation ministers of Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan met in Cairo for a new round. So this time they met in Cairo after the first meeting in the US. And so let's see what will happen. So Addis Ababa, of course, says that the project, which is dubbed a Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is crucial for its economic development. And right now it is nearly 70% done. So I don't know how Egypt thinks now Ethiopia should stop this project. It is nearly 70% done. Not 10, not 20, not 5%, not now that visibility study is being done. No, the project is almost done. So I don't know how Egypt expects Ethiopia to stop with this project? Did they approach Ethiopia at the start of this project, or did they have a talk at it, the countries that share this resource, Egypt is, Addis Ababa is saying this will generate around 6,000 megawatts of electricity to the country. So this will boost the economic growth as a country. That is what Ethiopia is saying. But Cairo, that is in Egypt, they're not having any of this, and they're saying this dam, which is located in Ethiopia's border with Sudan, and approximately 70%, which is complete, will restrict its already scarce share of water from the Nile. So what Egypt is essentially saying, should Ethiopia go ahead and complete this project, it will affect the flow of fresh water from the Nile to the people of Egypt. But as I said there earlier, Ethiopia, it's already 70% done. So I don't know what chances are there for now Ethiopia to stop. I don't know what economic sense that will make for Ethiopia. I can imagine. Such a project must have costed a lot of money, and I believe a lot of donor money. Normally, such projects, Africans, we get some donor funding out there. So I just don't know. Hopefully, they can find a proper resolution to this matter that will leave both countries at peace. It will not cause more problems. Emmanuel Nyakonda, you're saying it's just like in Zimbabwe, they behave the same way. Ukwa Isaac is saying dictatorship is high in Tanzania. You know what? Thank you so much for those sentiments. It is. Is it a working dictatorship like that in Rwanda? Is President Pombe Magufuli slowly transforming to Mr. Paul Kagame? Well, I don't want to hear that people are disappearing and being killed, because that is what has been happening in Rwanda. If you disagree and if you disappear from the country, he will get you. The government of Paul Kagame will find you. And people find you murdered in a car in the middle of a highway somewhere, or somewhere in a hotel in South Africa, or somewhere in Nairobi. There's somebody who was murdered here in Nairobi. So it's, So I hope it does not get to those levels in Tanzania, because as I said there, Tanzania is a country that we celebrate across Africa as one of the countries that is quite stable and very peaceful, and the people there are warm and welcoming, very nice people, So I just hope it does not get to those levels. And I think that political intolerance in Africa is what kills the goodness in our people, the political intolerance. President Pombe Magufuli, he's done well in other areas, but now these things that are happening under his watch will really tarnish, I think, even his legacy when he ceases to be the president there of Tanzania. So there's another Tanzanian who went to court, I think 2 months ago, to compel the court and allow the president to serve more than the terms that are mandated by the constitution in Tanzania. He went to the court and he said, you know what, President Pombe Magufuli has served us very well. He's the best president this country has ever had. So now we should allow him to continue serving, even past the mandate that he's been allowed by the constitution of Tanzania. I think that I don't know what happened to that case, but I'm just hoping that the court did not really pay much attention to that, because that is how these dictators in Africa, a few people in their circle tell them, you know what, you're the best. The country, you've done best. This country cannot do without you. So we need you to continue being in power as we continue plundering the resources of this country, as you continue stealing, and then we'll just lead this country with impunity there, as you have mentioned, Emmanuel Nyakonda. That is how we have watered and nurtured these dictators in Africa and across the world, because people around them don't tell them the truth. they make them believe that they're the best thing that has happened in those countries, and so they're blinded by even the situation in the ground there. So I'm just hoping that that case in the Tanzanian court never saw the day of light, because you're striving for Africa to embrace a democracy, to embrace change of leadership, to embrace different ideas, and just give chance to anybody who we think that can come and change our lives and our countries in the best way possible. But if we continue allowing people to overstay and violate the constitution and have constitutional coups that we see happening every now and then in Africa, then I think that those are very retrogressive moves that should not be encouraged anywhere in Africa. So we end with Namibia, where 6 Namibian officials and businessmen suspected of involvement in a bribery and money laundering scheme will remain in custody until February 20th, a court in the capital Windhoek has said. Now, the decision on Monday came after their lawyers say they would abandon their bail application following their arrest last week. This is according to the local media. So this is what really struck me this morning when I was reading this news. So 6 people were arrested, including the Minister of Fisheries and Maritime Resources, Mr. Bernard Esau, and the former Minister of Justice, Mr. Saki, who was accused of corruption, fraud, and tax evasion. Now, the other suspects include the Minister of Fisheries' son-in-law, Mr. Thompson Hatui Kulipi, and his cousin, James Hatui Kulipi. And I was just wondering, this business of stealing of government officials, and they have to involve even their family members, I think is so appalling. We saw it here in Kenya. I think that the guy who was mandated, Mr. Ali, is it? Somebody, he was chairing the land commission here in Kenya. So a lot of ills happened during his tenure, and now when investigations are being carried out, it was seen that a lot of this money was channeled through his wife's, his wife's account, his daughter's account. I don't know whose relative. It's ridiculous. So if you decide to steal and decide to make it a family stealing spree, I think it's very sad, and that just speaks to our morals. Sometimes, if I'm going to steal, then all of us we are going to be part of this loot as a family. I think that's very sad. So now they find themselves there, a whole family in the court facing corruption charges and fraud charges there. I think it's very sad. So I'm just going to take a very short break, and when I come back, I will just recap what we looked at this morning, and then we shall continue from there. It is a few, how many minutes? 32 minutes past midday here in Kenya. Good afternoon. I'll see you in a bit.
From 1992 in Kenya, elections have always been divisive in the form of violence, in the form of malpractices, in the form of all types of gerrymandering that has led to chaos that we have seen that has engulfed this country since independence. The biggest obstacle of the Kenyan elections is a very simple way out. The obstacle is we have never changed the forest. We have changed monkeys in the forest. If you want to cure the Kenya elections, you get a cure, a permanent cure for the Kenya elections. Change the forest. The monkeys will not come to that new forest. Reforms have been done around the Kenyan elections. Rules, regulations, laws. Are these laws enforced anyway? The answer is no. Most of the people break it, go with it, create chaos after they have not been punished. So the basis of the BBI is to interrogate the chapter, the seriousness of why elections produce violence every 5 years. Why do people fight? Yes, someone would say they are linked with tribal cocoons that conduct themselves or take part in the elections. The answer could be clearer, nearer there. But the solution, therefore, to safeguard, even if it is tribal, South Africa has got the biggest tribe, the Zulu. But still there are safeguards in South Africa that have safeguarded an election. That the Zulus don't dominate the entire South Africa because the electoral systems are safeguarded by principles and institutions. The institution of elections in Kenya and in many African countries has always been the product and has always been an institution that produces violence. Everywhere on the continent, you see electoral commissioners confused in reading their election results. Some of them don't even know the results. Some of them don't know how many votes were garnered by both parties. To avoid this mess, Kenya needs to look completely and put emphasis on the electoral reforms that are needed so that in 2022 there is no violence in the elections that will be conducted. For this reason, therefore, I would urge the chairman of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Chebukati, to say bye-bye, because he has held several controversial elections that we have seen, including under his auspices, one election nullified in the history of Africa. Thank you very much, viewers.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. This is Good Morning Africa. Benjamin Kanu, good morning to you. It is a good afternoon here in Nairobi, and thank you so much for joining us and the rest of you who have been with me since the start of the show. And just before we took our break, we were looking at the news-making headlines across Africa. And just who joined us, for those who just joined us, like Mr. Benjamin Kanu there, we've been looking at some very interesting stories happening in Africa today, or have happened in Africa today. And wherever you are, if there's something that is happening that you'd like to bring to our attention, please feel very free to do so. Share with us in the comment section, and I will read and share it with the rest of the world. So in the interest of just the people who joined us, we started with Sudan, where we looked at now the Sudanese academics, activists, politicians, and community leaders have signed an open letter to the United States President Mr. Donald Trump, asking the U.S. to remove Sudan on the list as one of the countries that are sponsoring terrorism across the world. This is not the first time such calls are coming from Sudan. We've seen the Prime Minister of Sudan make such, pleas before, but U.S. has been very reluctant in the manner in which they have been responding to this manner. So I don't know if this latest move by this group of people will elicit any tangible results there from the United States in regards to removing Sudan on that list of the countries that are sponsoring terrorism across the world. Remember, Sudan was enlisted, found itself in this list in 1993 after Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, was found to be hiding there in Sudan in 1993. And so that is what made Sudan to be put on that list. But now this new regime is arguing that, we've even disbanded Mr. Omar al-Bashir's party. We've gotten rid of the structures. We've gotten rid of his people. In fact, he's serving term in our court. He's facing charges there, and he's sitting sitting somewhere in a jail. So we've done a lot, and now we have a new prime minister and is trying to work on a new constitution. Remember, the constitution of Sudan was suspended earlier this year, and so they don't have a working constitution right now. So they're working on the structures and mechanisms and the modalities in what will be included in this new constitution, because that became a very contentious matter during the negotiations between the protesters and the army. Remember, Omar al-Bashir's party was an Islamist party. So based on, so they wanted, so the side of Omar al-Bashir, the side of the army generals, they wanted to have a Sharia constitution. But the protesters were saying, no, we want, as much as, we are also Muslims, but we will prefer to go to have a liberal constitution that is not Sharia based. So that became a matter of contention and a back and forth between the protesters and the army generals. And then finally they got to agree. Remember, they have a 3-year transition period. Thereafter, a total full control will be returned to the civilians, and then they can start having their own elections and just, ruling. And so let's see how that will work out. So I don't know if this latest move by these academics, activists, politicians, and community leaders will bear any fruits in regards to Sudan being removed from that damning list that has costed the country a lot in terms of investment from the international players there. Because when you hear a country is in the list of the countries that sponsor terrorism in the world, I mean, you stay away like a plague, because you don't want to go invest in that country in case your things or your investment, is seized by whatever powers there may be, or that militant group they're sponsoring. It's been a very bad situation there in Sudan. So let's see how the US will respond to that. So that is a conversation that we've had earlier, but I'll just recap a few of those items for the sake of our viewers who are just joining us. Like Samuel Chaga, you're saying good morning, Patchline and viewers, and good morning to you. It is an afternoon here in Nairobi. Thank you so much for finding time and joining and engaging with me this morning. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Dr. Matsanga, I was hoping he would join, but I think he got stuck. He was doing something earlier. He was busy. I think he had hoped he will finish in good time so that he can join, but not to worry. I think we're going on very well. So let's just, we're in the last minute of the show, 20 minutes to go. So yes, let's just look at this very quickly, and then we can see which way forward. And also in Tanzania, the international rights organization Amnesty International has said a decision by Tanzania to withdraw an article which allows its citizens and NGOs to sue it at the African Court on Human and People's Rights risk deepening repression. And in a statement, Amnesty said that the withdrawal denies individuals and organizations access to justice. So I'll just read a part of that statement that Amnesty International give out, and it says this move effectively blocks individuals and NGOs in the country from directly going to the court to seek redress for human rights violations in what is clearly a cynical attempt to evade accountability. That was part of the statement that was issued by Japheth Biogon, that is the Amnesty International's Africa Advocacy Coordinator there in Tanzania. So the country is the country that hosts the court in the northern city of Arusha, and this makes it the second country after Rwanda to withdraw the article. The move is likely to raise concern over the country whose human rights record has been under a scrutiny in the past few years. That move by Tanzania is worrying there. And so we looked at Libya and what is happening, and at least 5 people have died and more were wounded in an overnight airstrike there in the suburb of Libya's capital, Tripoli. Do you even still have a suburb in Libya, or everything is just torn? Do we even have a part of even Tripoli that is peaceful and it's just business as usual? I don't think so. Do we even have schools running anywhere in Libya? It's very sad. So the Libyan government said Emirati drones had carried out violent raids on the residential area of Aswani. So Emirati, that is the United Arab Emirates there, the drones from that country are the ones who were carrying out the attacks there in Tripoli. And so just the other day, the United Nations Security Council was condemning the external players who are fueling this war in Libya. And I don't understand the double speak when it comes to the United Nations Security Council, because some members there are heavily involved in this war in Libya, and they're coming out issuing these statements. It's some double speak that is very costly, because they keep going rounds and rounds and rounds, and they're not really, the intention is not to find a solution in Libya, and innocent lives keep getting lost here. And I think that is my worry, and that should be our worry in Africa. And we were hoping that the African Union, the last time they called an urgent meeting to deal with Libya was sometimes back in, was it in June or so? No, I think after the ousting of Omar al-Bashir, because before then they had planned to have an urgent meeting in Libya in July, not even in June. So a delegation of the United Nations was visiting, I think, Tripoli. No, the United Nations Security General Secretary Ban Ki-moon and his delegation were actually nearly bombed there. They were visiting Tripoli. It started, I think, in April. And so it has been an assault after assault. And the people keep their heart there. Now they're not even, there's no supply of clean water. Humanitarian crisis is deepening, and United Nations Security Council there continues to play politics at the expense of the people of Libya. And the AU is dead on this matter, seeing that President al-Sisi, Fattah al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, who also has very heavy interest there in Libya, he cannot be the person to find a solution to Libya if still the chair of African Union. Of course, not just him, even though his predecessors have failed in rescuing Libya. So with him, things have gotten even worse because he is him and France. They said there are substantial reports that have really found them to be culpable of helping the renegade Khalifa Haftar there, that is against the UN-backed, government. The oxymoronic politics going on there. So the African Union chairperson supports a rebel against the UN-backed government. The United Nations Security Council permanent member France, backs the rebel against the UN-backed government. You understand? So it's just politics that are intertwined, and the interests there that have left the people of Libya to suffer. And talking about Libya sometimes just gives me a headache because I don't think the players there, the international players, the interests that are involved in fueling peace war, I don't think it is in the best interest to see that peace returns in Libya. And now we see Libya has become a slaughtering field, and the migrants who have been using that to access the Mediterranean through to Europe have found themselves in the crossfire. Others, losing their lives. Others finding themselves in the slave markets. Remember that report on CNN last year? Still breaks my heart. Like there's a slave market where those Arabs from Libya was literally selling Africans from other African countries. That really was heartbreaking. So it is the insecurity and the lack of structures and the lack of stability in Libya that has seen now things like this start to thrive, which is unfortunate. So it's not just something that is affecting Libya. I think it is by extension affecting other African countries, because the insecurity is spreading very slowly to other African countries. When you have a very huge porous border in the Mediterranean in Libya, and that shares that moves slowly to other countries that are neighboring there and slowly trickles down to other African countries. So that is something that should worry all of us. And also we've looked at the South African police who arrested 3 members of the National Christian Resistance Movement. May I say this was a group of white South Africans who were planning to go attack government buildings, shopping centers, and informal settlements that are mostly inhabited by Black people. I mean, terrorism is taking another face. It's not, because when you read, and they were having explosives and ammunitions and firearms, those are terrorists. Those are white South African terrorists, and they should be treated as so. That is the problem when it comes to the law and how we handle these things. You see, in America, when it's a white person, I'm sorry, and I'm not talking race here. When you see it's a white person who has gone and opened fire at like the one who killed people in I think was it in Florida, and then you see an attack that has been performed, say, by a Black person, which rarely happens. I've not seen a Black person being part of a mass shooting. A lot of them happens by the white, Americans. And then you'll hear, oh, that is mental health. It is, but when it's somebody outside of a white person, then they are branded as terrorists. So let the law cut in both sides. So I think this was a terrorist act that was being planned to be done against the people of South Africa, whether Black or white. So it does not matter, but these people should be treated as terrorists, because when you read and you see the kind of ammunition they had and the plans that they had, these are not people that should even be left to be in the society. So they should make sure they're kept off the streets of South Africa, and they look for other members of that organization. And we also looked at Mali, and now they've set the official date for the country's inclusive national dialogue. No, we really didn't look at this national dialogue in Mali. Mali has been one of the countries that has been affected by the scourge of Boko Haram, has really spread its tentacles there in Mali and also in Burkina Faso, and it has been suffering, and of course it has been experiencing some instability there in the country, that now the president is calling for a national dialogue. This is a conversation that perhaps we'll have tomorrow. I'm hoping it's not like that national dialogue that Mr. Paul Biya had in Cameroon, that was not inclusive at all, that failed to achieve the mandate or talk about the things that really we were hoping that they will look at. The problems involving the Anglophones and the Ambazonians, and the reason why they're even calling for secession. So it was just a glossy look at. The people and the players in that dialogue did not even delve into the real issues that are bringing the conflict between the Anglophones and the rest of Cameroon. And so it's very interesting that the President Paul Biya even came out and said, the national dialogue came out very nicely. It was very successful. Something even the US, I think, has raised its concerns. And I think since then, we've seen the measures that the US has taken against Cameroon. That dialogue was a sham. It did not achieve the mandate that we were hoping that it will. The issues that Ambazonians were hoping that will be addressed, none of them even came close. And so I don't know if that is how Mr. Paul Biya imagines that he's going to find peace and have one Cameroon. I don't think that is something that Ambazonians even want to hear of one Cameroon. Ambazonians have been very vocal in what they want. And so Mr. Paul Biya, anyway, has played very deaf ears. So he's saying, you know what, you continue agitating for your rights. One day you'll get tired and then you'll just come back. So in one of the proposals was said that, now bilingual, the use of bilingual, both French and English, will be returned in the Ambazonia, region, because the government was insisting that the schools there and court sessions there will be carried out through French being an official language, which is a shame because French and English is really not any African language. You're sitting here fighting about, even languages that are very foreign. And so you see, it's very ridiculous that it has even come to that. But from an outsider, or for somebody who does not understand the intricacies and the politics and the dynamics of the French of the Cameroon Anglophone problem, is you might think it's not just a language thing. It goes deeper into years of repression, economic marginalization, and of the Anglophone people. The same case with Biafrans as well. It's not just the people who slept one morning and decided, you know what, I think it's time for us to leave Nigeria. No, it is when you have been repressed, when you have been made to feel like you are a second-class citizen in your own country, a country that is supposed to be your country. At the end of the day, you don't get the same treatment, you don't get the same resources. There's a very unfair redistribution of national resources and unfair treatment if you're coming from a certain people or a certain part of the country. So at some point, the people can take in to some point, but after a while they'll be like, no, I think this is not right. And now that is why we see now Biafrans agitating to have their own country, and that is why we see now the Anglophones continuing with the agitation to have their own country called Ambazonia. And so when we have leaders who don't even care or pay attention or seek to hear or even just sit down and have an open-hearted conversation, then like what happened, the sham of the national dialogue that happened there in Ambazonia the end of September, in Cameroon the end of September, because even the leaders of Ambazonia were not present. The leaders are serving a life sentence. The sentences were made in the wee hours of the night. Like, which court operates at 3 a.m. in the morning? Which court do you know? And then this was civilians. Why they were even being tried in a martial court, it's just beyond me. So even the whole process was just a sham, and the manner in which these cases went on is just a sham. And the reason why the world is not even talking about it, I don't understand. But these are some of the things when you see happen, and then you feel, you know what, I cannot be part of such a regime, such an organization, such a government. And so that instead continued to fuel Ambazonians to even want to have their own country. And we've seen that the same cause by Biafrans. Now we see that Mr. Nnamdi Kanu cannot even come back home to bury his mother, which is very sad situation there. And so thank you very much. So we looked at that. We also looked at the DRC Congo and what is happening in Beni there. As I said there earlier, the locals there banned the United Nations, the MONUSCO, that is the mission there in DRC, the United Nations mission there in the DRC. The locals there were tired because they have all the security apparatus around them, but still insecurity is rampant. Militias just come in and kill people at will, and nobody even is doing anything. And also the latest updates on the Nile dispute involving Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. We've seen it, the second round of talks. The first one took place in the United States, and the second phase of these talks were held in Cairo yesterday, and I think is still continuing there. And we also looked at Namibia and some former officials there in court over allegations over charges on corruption, money laundering, among others. And so basically that's what we're looking at. And also in South Sudan, an international aid group compound was, stormed in by some suspected, militiamen. It's not really clear who these men were, but they went there and they stormed the compound in South Sudan and assaulted several staffers of the international aid group. I don't know what is it that they took from that camp, and I don't know what is happening in South Sudan, but I'm just, every morning I go online and I'm trying to look for information. I'm trying to see, so what is the latest in regards to this peace talk, in regards to this, the extension, 100 days that were extended, that will be elapsing in on 22nd of February. So I'm always curious to find out what is really happening, what is the latest, what are some of the gains that are being made in terms of sorting out these sticking issues that they were saying were not sorted out, so that the peace deal and the unity government was unable to be formed on the 12th of November. But so far, what we hear from the updates there is not something to write home about. Mr. Machar the other day was quite happy that the U.S. has recalled his ambassador to South Sudan. I don't know why he will be happy about that. That should worry him. And also, he mentioned that nothing much has been done. And this is something I've been saying. They're just quiet. And 2 weeks before the deadline, now they come out saying, we require more time. I think the world is slowly getting tired with these leaders of South Sudan. So we need an update in what is happening in South Sudan. We need to know that they're working towards forming a unity government this time round. And if they fail, I think the whole world should hold the leaders of South Sudan accountable for failure to bring a stable government for South Sudan as a country, and also for its own people who are outside here, wandering and being called refugees and just trying to find a footing and safe haven across the world. And yet they have a beautiful country which they should be settled in right now and, help develop and help rebuild from years of war. So thank you so much. That's been our show today. Good Morning Africa show. It is top of the hour, 1 p.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for joining me and for your company and for engaging with me. And let's see each other here tomorrow for another edition of Good Morning Africa on behalf of Punchline Africa Television and on behalf of Dr. David Matsanga, who was caught up today. He has some things he had to take care of. He was not able to be with us. We thank you so much for your patronage, and let's see each other tomorrow. My name is Miriam Agutu. Good afternoon.